Do I look like I put some weight on? Don't say that. My wife might be listening. This mic is live. Yeah. Hello. Good evening. Let me turn my phone off here. My name is Jason Vickery. I'm the Director of Safety and Security for the Temecula Valley Unified School District. I've had the job now for 2 months. Prior to that, I had 27 years with the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. In my time with the Sheriff's Department, one of my last assignments was down on the Border Crime Suppression Team. And our main goal was drugs crossing the border. And over the years that I was there, what we saw was the rise of fentanyl that was coming across the border. And it was coming in powder form, pill form, things like that. Another assignment that some of the deputies on the team had with some of the federal agents were investigating fentanyl overdose deaths. And what really concerned me a couple of years ago was the fact that we were seeing your just normal kids who you wouldn't think would be involved in drugs just one time taking a pill and it having deadly consequences. And we had teams of deputies that's all they did was investigate these teams. So when I got here, one of my priorities was to get with the district and with the help to educate the kids up here and the parents so they know about this drug. It's something that's relatively new, but it's, as you'll see in the presentation, how prevalent it's becoming everywhere and the devastating effects it's having on our community. So without further ado, Matt Capilouto is here to give his presentation, and after that, Special Agent Ed Byrne from the Homeland Security, and he works on a fentanyl death overdose investigative team, and so he has some good information as well. So I want to thank everybody for being here, and I know there's not a lot of people here, but the goal is that as we keep this awareness going on, that more and more people have these conversations with their friends, family. What you see here tonight, please talk to your friends this weekend when you're out having dinner about what you've seen and what fentanyl is and how it's affecting us. So thank you.
Can you hear? Okay, you can hear me. Mic's on. All right. I want to thank everybody for coming. What you are about to see here in the short film that we're going to present is arguably the greatest threat our youth face today. We're going to break this presentation up into 2 segments. The first segment is going to consist of a short documentary, about 20 minutes, followed by a Q&A with some of the people that you're about to see in this documentary. We'll take probably just a 5-minute break to prepare for the second part of this presentation, where we're going to do a more in-depth look at fentanyl. I'll go into a brief slideshow, and then I'll be followed up by Special Agent Ed Byrne, who's here. We have 3 nonprofit organizations here being represented: Aaron Neville Foundation, ANF, Void, Victims of Illicit Drugs, and Drug-Induced Homicide. We have booths out front where we have information. There'll be representatives from the organizations after this presentation who can answer questions as well. I'm going to ask everybody to please turn off all your cell phones and devices, and we'll get started.
look at me when I talk to you. You sit there and tell me.
Unresponsive at this time. ETA about 2 minutes. Anything further?
My name is Dominic Tierno. Since I graduated high school in 2014, I've had the great honor of directing a number of documentary films about drugs and drug addiction. Our mission is to revolutionize drug education by telling real-life stories that motivate young people to make one of the most important decisions of their life, and that's the decision to not use drugs. 2020 was the worst year for drug overdose deaths that we have ever seen. In the beginning of summer in 2020, I came across this article. A 14-year-old kid from a town I grew up in had died from what appeared to be a drug overdose. He's a smart, funny guy who, like many kids, was struggling with some anxiety issues and decided that he would turn to drugs to see if he could help himself with that. What happened was he went and bought this pill, this Oxycontin pill, from a guy he had known because he thought that pill might ease the pain of what he was going through mentally. Well, he didn't know it, but that Oxycontin pill wasn't a real Oxycontin pill. It was a fake pill. It looked just like the pill that he wanted to try, but instead of Oxycontin, it was made with fentanyl, a synthetic opioid known to be 50 to 100 times the strength of morphine. That one pill he took that night killed him almost instantly, and his mom found him dead in his bedroom the next morning. Before I can even finish that article, I'm scrolling through and I see another linked article. Not far away, around the same time, another 14-year-old dead from fentanyl. So then I go back to Google and I type in fentanyl deaths. I hit search, and then it all made sense. I saw another kid, and I saw high school students, college students, young adults, all recent, all over the country, all dead from fentanyl. And so I'm looking at that and I'm saying, these aren't just normal overdose deaths. These people think they're taking one drug and turns out they're being killed. Why have we not heard about this?
It's a drug 50 times more potent than heroin, and doctors say just touching it can send you to the emergency room. We're talking about the synthetic opioid fentanyl.
The first time I heard about fentanyl was my sister busting in my house, being like, don't touch anything in his room, it's fentanyl. And I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, I have no idea what's going on right now. So most people haven't heard of this because we haven't been talking about it. Back in 2013, when it first started showing up, only about 3% of drug users were dying from it. Now we're looking at over 50% of drug deaths being attributed to fentanyl. If Alexander could have got a lesson, I wish he knew about fentanyl. I wish he understood that fentanyl poisoning is real and that every time you try something, you're playing with your life. It is pill roulette every time you try it. As a mom of a kid that was just trying to experiment, that's where it is. As a mom of a kid that died just wanting to experiment, I wish I could just shake you and tell you and make it real for you. But I don't know how to do that. I won't be there when you're faced with these decisions. I know that if he knew the effects of his passing, it would crush him. He never intended for me to find him on his bedroom floor. He never intended for his dad to administer CPR, trying to save his life while we were waiting for the paramedics. Even his 12-year-old sister wanted to run in there and try to help do CPR, but I held her back. Alex didn't intend for me to see him wheeled away on a stretcher and put into an ambulance. Alex had no intentions
seeing him lying on a stainless steel table, covered with a sheet with only his head showing. Alex had no intentions of me knowing what it felt like to kiss his face for the last time. The images that I'm left with of that day replay in my mind on a regular basis. Please do not put your family through this. And please, 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 I beg of you, learn about fentanyl now. Don't wait until your best friend has died, or a brother or your sister. Learn about it now so you can help your friends. You can tell them, you can warn them. You can be a very important part of saving lives.
This would be how much cocaine somebody would have to ingest to kill them. This is the approximate number of prescription pills one would have to ingest to kill them. This is the amount of heroin the average person would have to ingest to kill them. Fentanyl. You're gonna have to bring that camera up here real close to see it. This much fentanyl would kill you and I if we split it. They put fentanyl in cocaine. They put fentanyl in heroin. They put fentanyl, as we already know and talked about, into counterfeit pills. It's odorless, it's tasteless, you don't know it's there. And when you find out it's there, it's too late. You won't even know it. You'll be dead. 2,500 people would be killed by that amount of fentanyl. Does that sound like a drug to you? Does that sound more like a poison? I was a police officer for 31 years, and during my time in narcotics, I'd never heard of fentanyl. In homicide, I saw many, many tragic things. I saw people that were killed by shootings, stabbings, beatings. Nothing that I saw at that particular time would have ever prepared me to see Jessica. I was at work. I got a telephone call from my wife, Cherie. She was frantic, uncontrollable, screaming into the phone about Jessica. And I knew something had happened. Jessica lived with her boyfriend, Nicholas, and a stupid decision in which they ordered and had some cocaine delivered to them, to their house, resulted in them ingesting it. And my daughter, at that particular time, became forever 29 years of age. Jessica didn't want to die. She has a beautiful daughter, Alara, who is now with Cherie and I, and we are raising. And she had everything to live for. Jessica knew about fentanyl, but, you know, from talking about this issue after she died with her friends, I discovered that Jessica had a friend that had even died a couple of weeks prior to her death. And Jessica had spoken to her friends about being afraid. Well, if you knew about it, why would you even risk it, sweetheart? You knew it. Why did you make that bad decision? Who knows? Those are things that you'll never answer. We're just trying to prevent it from happening to somebody else.
Dealers are using social media to show off what they've got, infiltrating feeds of ever younger teens curious about this flashy lifestyle. With more addicts and overdoses by the day, they've got drivers on demand delivering any drug to your door 24/7.
Social media app has changed the game when it comes to narcotics. Fentanyl's all over the place, and just massive amounts of it. And some of them are going to fall trap to that.
4 years ago, DEA in Arizona seized 0 fentanyl. This last year, we seized enough fentanyl to kill 70 million people. You're playing Russian roulette out there when you're taking these pills and you're buying this stuff off the street.
Social media has completely changed the landscape of the drug trade. Most people start by searching for what they think are prescription medications, and drug dealers respond saying that's what they have. But what you have to be careful about is what you're asking for and what you get. can be two different things. And if you're buying this stuff from somebody online, their bottom line is they're just looking to make a quick buck. They don't have your best interest in mind. They'll tell you whatever you want to hear. Unless you're getting these drugs from your doctor or a licensed pharmacy in a bottle that has your name on it, you may as well assume these drugs are fake. You're not getting the real thing. Fentanyl's literally taken over the drug market. It's in everything. It's in meth, it's in cocaine. Obviously the counterfeit pills that are out there. We're starting to see it showing up now in marijuana. The people who make this stuff, who are putting the fentanyl and everything, they have one goal: to get you hooked. Fentanyl is highly, highly addictive. They're gonna trick you into thinking you're getting something you're not, to take you down that rabbit hole, to get you hooked on fentanyl and have you become an addict. Because to them, you're a customer, and you'll be a returning customer at that point. One of those times, you're gonna get enough fentanyl to kill you. Alex was in her bedroom at night, getting ready for bed. She went on social media in search of oxycodone. It wasn't hard for her to find a drug dealer, and she had what she thought was oxycodone delivered to our house. One pill had enough fentanyl to kill 5 people. My daughter took half of this pill and died instantly. In an instant, my life was changed forever. My last memory of my daughter is of her being wheeled out on a gurney. I saw my daughter brought into this world, and I saw her leave this world. I have 4 daughters and a beautiful wife. Every time we take a family picture, I don't see who's there, I see who's missing. It's an odd feeling to looking forward to dying, because you know that's when your heart will be made whole again. Alex would have never wanted this. Don't do it to your parents.
It's the end of the world at the palm of my hand. If you can't come with me, I'll understand.
It was March 31st. And that evening was one of the most special evenings we had had in a long time. I told him to come downstairs. And I wanted to hug him. I don't know why. And he came down the stairs and he hugged me and he said, "Dad, I'm so sorry for all the things that I had put you through in the past." And I said, "Don't worry about it, Daniel. You're just a kid and you're just learning, but you're going places. You got a great future coming ahead of you. I'm just so proud of you. You have no idea." All right, Dad, good night. Love you. Good night, son. I love you too. See you tomorrow morning. Next day, about 8 o'clock in the morning, when I walked into his room, he was in a lying position facing up against the headboard with his hands over his chest. And I saw his eyes. He had a little blue on top of his lips. I screamed at the very top of my lungs, "Daniel! Daniel! Daniel!" I called the paramedics. They carried him down the stairs and put him on the first floor and started doing chest compressions. And then they took him to Los Angeles Children's Hospital, where we were put in a waiting room. And later on that evening, a team of doctors came in. And they said that your boy is just a shell of a boy that he was before. He's not coming back.
my only child. I couldn't protect them. I couldn't save his life. I couldn't save my son, Daniel. My son is gone. It wasn't supposed to be this way. He was supposed to graduate from high school this year. If you love yourself, if you respect yourself, if you love life, you have a choice. Because it is between life or death. This is no joke. You can and will die. How do I know this? I can tell you that I've met thousands upon thousands upon thousands of parents nationwide. I wish somebody had sat me down and had this talk with me about what fentanyl does to people. I didn't get that chance. You do. You know, there's always been one main problem with the films that we make, and it's the reason why we try to keep them as real and as relatable as possible. People just so commonly think that it will not happen to them. I'm talking about great people, nice people, cool people, intelligent people with big plans for the future, big potential. Gone because of one choice they didn't know would end their life. Fentanyl is coming for anyone and everyone. So the most important message that I can give to kids, to teens, young adults, anybody, is the same old message we've heard time and time again. And that's to really get serious about not even trying a drug. You see, back when we first started, I was telling kids not to use drugs because you might get hooked, you might get addicted. Now there's not even time for that. Now it's don't try a drug because you might actually not wake up tomorrow. You might actually not get another chance. One choice is all it takes. If you don't believe that, I guarantee you, at this point, there was someone very similar to you who wished they could be here right now to look into the camera and look into your eyes and say, don't do it. Please don't do it. Please, I wish I wouldn't have done it. Don't do it. Don't risk your life. So my question for you is, are you going to listen? Or will it be your family and your friends holding your picture, wishing they could have been there to tell you?
This is my son, Alexander. He died at 14 years old from fentanyl poisoning.
This is our daughter, Jessica. She was 29 years old when she was killed by fentanyl.
This is my daughter, Alex. She was murdered at 20 years old by a drug dealer who sold her a counterfeit pill made of fentanyl.
This is my son, Daniel Joseph Puerta Johnson, killed at the age of 16 by illicit fentanyl.
This is my son.
The can't come with me, I'll understand. I'll understand.
Amy Neville, Steve Filson, can you come up? Thank you, everyone. I'm going to take this opportunity to introduce a couple of my best friends, Steve Filson and Amy Neville, who you saw in the film. We're here to answer questions for you. This is one of the most important parts of the presentation. We know you have questions. We'd love to answer them. You know, our goal right now is saving lives, your kids' lives. So feel free. Somebody's got to have a question. We got a microphone. I'll come to you, or you can tell me what the question is. And you can ask any of us here. Do you want to address that or me?
Let's let Ed Byrne discuss that when he comes up.
Yeah, that's a good question for Ed Byrne, Special Agent, Homeland Security. There's kind of a little bit different twist as we found it with marijuana, so hold tight on that question.
One thing I'd like to emphasize to everybody, and keep it in mind, like I said, the 31 years that I was a police officer, the things that I did, the things that I saw, my experiences, nothing prepared me for, obviously, the death of my own daughter, but particularly under those circumstances. I knew nothing. Remember, knowledge is power. Fentanyl now has our society powerless. We are victims at this time to fentanyl. Knowledge is power. You have the ability to spread this word, spread it amongst your families, your friends, your communities. Get your community governments. Get the police. Make sure they're on board.
Use the microphone because people in the stream will hear it better.
I'm sorry. Whatever. The stigma of addiction prevails in our society still. Addiction has nothing to do with fentanyl at this particular point. Alexander was not addicted to anything. No addiction. My daughter had a substance use disorder. I'm not ashamed of her. The bottom line is, but for fentanyl, Jessica would still be here. I would be able to enjoy my retirement, but now I love it. I don't regret anything at all about having my granddaughter, but Alara keeps us busy and keeps the memory of Jessica alive. Please, if anything I can say to each and every one of you, spread the message, learn more that you don't know about, and don't be afraid to ask. People are afraid to talk to us because of our situation. There's nothing that you can say to me that will hurt me, that will insult me, because the truth is what you need to hear. So, don't hesitate. Yes, sir. Yeah, ma'am. Fentanyl, the history goes back to probably around 2013 when it first started popping up in prominence within our society. But fentanyl goes back to the 50s. Fentanyl is a legitimate pharmaceutical medication that's used for chronic, serious pain relief and things such as that. Cancer patients, have used it successfully since the 60s. Other people in extreme pain have used it since the 60s. What had happened, and again, keep in mind that there is a legitimate pharmaceutical use for fentanyl, but it's prescribed and watched by a physician.
Synthetic illicit fentanyl arrived in our country via China. People started then producing it, putting it into different substances, pressing it into the counterfeit pills, which we had talked about. Ed Byrne will cover all this when he's up here. He's the expert. He's the Homeland Security investigator, and you'll have a lot of questions. But what has happened, the cartels, narcotics distributors, they're business people. And what they found is a narcotic that's 50 to 100 times more powerful than heroin or morphine, and they started putting it into substances and distributing it. Unfortunately, there's no quality control in this distribution and manufacture of these things. You got, just look at simply, maybe you got some clown with a blender. He's got a base powder that he puts in there, baby food or baby formula or something, who knows? Throw fentanyl in it, turn on the blender, then start popping pills through a pill press. Is there any quality control? Heck no. You may get something with nothing. You may get something that's almost pure. You may get whatever. That's the problem. It's a crapshoot. It's Russian roulette. And people, if you don't have a pill that you're going to take that wasn't prescribed, obtained from your doctor or a pharmacy, I guarantee you it's counterfeit, has fentanyl in it to one level or another. Don't take it. Why is it out here? Matt touched on it. The video touched on it. I think these people just want to form a whole society of addicts because addiction is marketing. It's money. As long as somebody's addicted, they're going to want the product. As long as the product's needed, they'll do that. Once people don't want fentanyl, sadly, they'll move on to something else. Let's worry about fentanyl right now and fight it. Did I answer your question, sort of? Okay.
Amy, would you like to say something?
I know some of you, and this has come from experience now, giving various presentations, but some of you might be sitting there with a question that's too personal for you to ask in this setting, or you just feel uncomfortable asking it right here, right now. We'll be outside afterwards. We can talk then, or usually I have a day where I'm answering emails and calls based on the presentation we gave. So please, please, please ask a question. The one thing that I hear the most that people will say to me, to my face, which is always surprising to me though, is, oh, my kid will never do that. Even after watching the film, even after hearing about the dangers and how easy it is, or even if the child knows somebody, that, oh, my child will never do that. And to that I say, you're right, your kid probably won't do it the way Alexander did it. Alexander had a curiosity for drugs from a very young age based on the first drug prevention week he went to at his school. But could your kid be at college? It's the first big party, they have a massive headache, and a friend turns to them and says, oh, here, I have something for that. And now they're gone. Could your kid have an injury that they can't get into the doctor for, and somebody says, oh, here, I have something for the pain, and now they're gone. You know, that person that gave them that pill didn't intend to hook them on anything or kill them, but unfortunately, that is an unintended consequence of these illicit pills. You trust your friends, right? I mean, even as adults, we trust our friends. And another thing that has come up multiple times, and the first couple of times it really surprised me, was a PSA I did with my sheriff. They put it all throughout the county I live in, and I had many adults contact me that will, first of all, they always explain how they have a legitimate reason for their prescription, but for whatever reason, that prescription of OxyContin runs out before they can get their refill. And they want to go to the streets, and they're calling me to verify with me whether or not they can really find a legitimate prescription pill. You just can't. You cannot find a legitimate, and no one's crushing up Oxy, throwing in fentanyl, and remaking these pills. These pills just are fentanyl. So whatever that drug dealer who you think is your friend is telling you, they are lying to you, and that's important to remember that.
Okay, I'm going to jump into one more question here. Go ahead. Yeah, thanks for asking. It is on YouTube and Facebook, and we ask that you do please share it. There's no copyrights or anything. It could be shared amongst schools. It can be shown anywhere. So yeah, please spread the message.
We have a resource card at the Void table and the ANF table
that has a QR code on it that will take you to resources, but that will also take you to the Void website when it's on the Void website as well.
Okay, and I think a lot more questions are going to be answered as I go through this slideshow with you guys here. I want to sort of reintroduce myself again. My name is Matt Capilouto. I am the president of an organization called Drug-Induced Homicide. Our mission is three-part. We look to help states that don't have legislation that holds these people accountable. We look to states to enact laws that will hold these dealers accountable for dealing the death that they do. Another part of our mission is to raise the awareness about the effectiveness of criminal investigation when somebody dies from a drug toxicity death, rather than it just being ruled an overdose like it typically has been up until recent years. We feel that every drug toxicity death should be investigated as a crime. And then perhaps the most important part of our mission is to support families who have victims that have been unlawfully delivered a controlled substance resulting in their death. So if there's any people here that are in that boat and we have not met, please speak with me personally after this presentation. With the number of people that are here in the audience, I'm just curious, just by a show of hands, how many of you know somebody that has died from fentanyl? Wow. For the amount of people that are here and the amount of hands that just went up, I would say that's probably half of you. Quick question. Can somebody tell me what this picture is? What do you see in this picture? This young man right here. You know what I see? You see that crowd? That's how many people died from fentanyl last year. Puts it in perspective. And this year's going to be worse. What is fentanyl? Fentanyl is a powerful synthetic opioid analgesic that is similar to morphine, but is 80 to 100 times more potent. It is also 50 times stronger, and what I want to emphasize here, more addictive than heroin. It's a Schedule II prescription drug, and it's typically used to treat patients with severe pain or to manage pain after trauma or major surgery. How does fentanyl affect the brain? Like heroin, morphine, and other opioid drugs, fentanyl works by binding to the body's opioid receptors, which are found in areas of the brain that control pain and emotions. After taking opioids regularly, the brain adapts to the drug, diminishing its sensitivity, making it hard to feel pleasure from anything besides the drug. People who become addicted, seeking drugs and drug use takes over their lives. I'd make that part in yellow stand out because I want to reiterate that. Once you start taking this stuff, it becomes impossible to feel pleasure from anything else. You know, the normal person could go to Disneyland and go on Space Mountain or go see a movie and we're going to be happy. Not once you start taking these drugs. Nothing gives you pleasure except the drug itself. That's how potent and addictive this stuff is. To the right, fentanyl's effects. You start out, number one effect, extreme happiness. After that, nothing really good follows. Drowsiness, nausea, confusion, constipation, sedation, problems breathing, unconsciousness, and ultimately death. How did fentanyl end up on the black market? Purdue Pharma was the makers of OxyContin. They are largely known as the company that started the opioid crisis. Back in the late 90s, they came up with this drug. They started marketing it to doctors to prescribe to patients who were under extreme pain or who had undergone surgeries or trauma. Purdue Pharma was the very first pharmaceutical company to start giving doctors kickbacks for prescribing the drug. So what do they say is the root of all evil? Money, of course. Now doctors had an incentive to start prescribing this drug to their patients because they were making extra money off of it. So what happens? Normally a patient who is prescribed this drug should have suffered some sort of severe trauma or be in some severe chronic pain, and we saw doctors start prescribing it for relatively minor aches and pains. okay? And then what happened was this stuff is so addictive, people got hooked on it. They started coming back to their doctors for more. A doctor happily is gonna prescribe more, right? Because they're making more money on it. So you see an endless cycle here. Now people start dying because their body is adapted to it. They need more and more for it to have the same effect. And here you saw the government step in around the early 2009-ish range, and they limited the amount that doctors could prescribe to patients. Sounds good, right? But it had unintended consequences. Those unintended consequences are, hey, you need so much oxy to get your relief, and now your doctor is not prescribing you that much. Of course, now you turn to the black market. China and the Mexican cartels saw a need for this. They saw how many people in America were using opioids, specifically Oxycontin and oxycodone made by Purdue Pharma. They filled the gap. So they started making the counterfeit pills. And I have on here, I want to point out a couple things. You hear the term laced a lot. You hear oxy laced with fentanyl, Percocet, Xanax laced with fentanyl. These pills are not laced. That implies that they're taking a legitimate opioid pill, somehow breaking it open and sprinkling some fentanyl in it, putting it back together, and here, now you have a laced oxy with fentanyl. No, absolutely not the case. These pills are 100% made from scratch, counterfeit. It's deception at its worst. And that leads me to that bottom sentence right there. That's not an overdose when somebody receives one of these pills. They've just been poisoned. Here's a short video I want to play for you real quick. He sort of makes a tie between the connection between the Mexican drug cartels and China and what is happening.
Fatal drug overdoses spiking to record levels in the U.S. last year as illegal narcotics continue to flow into the country from the southern border. And the pictures here, the disturbing images you see on your screen, are drugs, tons of drugs, seized by Border Patrol agents in just the last month alone. Former DEA agent Derek Waltz joins me now. We see those images, and it really is a crisis. I mean, there is no question about it, even though the administration once actually hesitated to call it a crisis. How have border policies under the Biden administration fueled this drug crisis in our country?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the brave men and women of the Border Patrol and CBP for their relentless effort to keep the drugs out of the country and save lives. So the policies obviously are hurting our national security. The crime is escalating around the country. But most importantly, Julie, is the Mexican cartels are now the enemy of our children. They are engaged in a sustained deadly assault against our American future generation of kids. So you look at the fentanyl poisoning, you look at the fentanyl murders, that's what it is. This is no longer just an opioid addiction or an opioid crisis, because the kids, they may stay away from pills or stay away from opioids and go to cocaine or methamphetamine, but they're dying instantly. This is murder, so we have to change the perception, we have to change the education, and our schools, our teachers, our parents have to know that this is a deadly crisis. We've never seen this in the history of the country.
For our viewers to understand the seriousness behind fentanyl, okay, it is between 50 and 100 times stronger than morphine. That's an opiate which is used in hospitals to treat serious pain, a lot of times used to treat patients who are at the end of their lives, okay? Fentanyl seizures are skyrocketing at the border. Over the last 3 years alone, fentanyl seizures are up 4,000%. Here on this program yesterday, Pain founder Virginia Krieger had this to say about the border opening. Her daughter died because of this kind of drug use, and how the border crisis is opening the door to illegal drugs. Watch.
This partnership in combination with our current border policies have allowed this fentanyl to continuously pour over the southwest border practically unabated.
I think it's interesting in this interview, she talked about the fact that, the people that are dying are not necessarily your typical drug users, those who are addicted. Her daughter was not addicted to this drug. It was a one-time thing. She said that kids should learn from their mistakes, not die from them. I mean, which is an excellent point.
So anyway, Julie, look, this is a beautiful young girl. She was coming home for a Christmas break from Arizona State University, right? Alice Capilouto from California. And the parents found her dead from one OxyContin pill that was purchased on social media. This is different. This is not like anything this country has ever faced. And it's really aggravating that the mainstream media will continue to call it an opioid crisis. Kids are taking drugs. Let's not worry about it. The parents aren't parenting. No, this is the Mexican cartels who have formed a deadly partnership with the Chinese criminals to really destroy our future. That's what it is. We have to stop dancing around the issue. Look at the CDC stats. 93,000 people died last year. Those numbers are way underreported as well. And the majority are fentanyl related. The coroner report in Ohio, first 6 months of 2020, reflects 85% of the deaths are related to fentanyl. So it's fentanyl coming from labs in Mexico, across our border, flooding our streets all over America. That's what we're dealing with. This is different. This is not kids, going into the medicine cabinet of their parents. This is different. So we have to change what we're saying.
Yeah, and we got to make some change at the border. Derek Maltz, thank you very much for talking to us this morning.
And if I wasn't clear, I want to back up just a little bit. So China is the largest manufacturer and producer of fentanyl. They sell the fentanyl and the precursor, the ingredients basically that make fentanyl. They're selling it to the Mexican drug cartels. The Mexican drug cartels are making the counterfeit pills, putting it all in all the different street drugs, and sending it across our border. I want to touch on a couple of things here. Why is fentanyl so dangerous? I mainly want you to look at the pills. Those are pills that have been seized by the DEA. You see the real ones and you see the fake ones. You can't tell the difference. Our kids aren't going to be able to tell the difference. And that's what they're producing. Where is fentanyl found? Of course, we're talking predominantly here about the pills. We're finding counterfeit Percocet, counterfeit OxyContin, counterfeit Xanax, and now we're starting to see a fair amount of counterfeit Adderall. Just about any pill that you buy on the street, you can assume it's fake. We're seeing fentanyl put in the street drugs, cocaine, heroin, MDMA, methamphetamine. On the horizon, not even on the horizon, we've actually seen this. Vapes. Vapes are being contaminated with fentanyl. Of course, vapes are popular with young kids. Our young kids are not buying them at the legal shops where you have to be 21 to buy them. Of course, they're buying them on the street, and it's those street ones that are laced with fentanyl, and that is to get them addicted to the fentanyl. People begin seeking fentanyl after being duped into it. There are people legitimately now seeking fentanyl, and you wonder why that is. And that's because it's highly addictive, and virtually all of, and I've talked to many, addicts and recovering addicts that were addicted or are addicted to fentanyl, the first time they took fentanyl, they didn't know it. It was in a Percocet pill, a counterfeit Percocet pill they received, one of these others, cocaine, whatever. They got hooked on the fentanyl, and then that led them down a road of being addicted to the fentanyl. I want to tell you a short story about a father who I met semi-recently. Jack Yerry here. Jack Yerry's the son of Ron Yerry. Ron Yerry's a former NFL professional football player, Hall of Famer, matter of fact. His son, Jack Yerry, was a star football player just a couple of years ago at Murrieta Valley High School, following in his dad's footsteps to eventually become a professional football player. He was picked up, he had basically, he could have gone to any college of his choice, full ride scholarship. While in high school, the week of one of his last games, he tore ligaments in his ankle. There was no way he was going to miss this there was no way he was going to miss this football game. So he started researching what he could do. He found out that Percocet would help kill the pain. He found somebody on campus to sell him a Percocet pill. He took that Percocet pill. He OD'd. His dad found him unconscious in his bathroom at home. Had to call medics. Had to be revived. From that point forward, something triggered in his brain, he's hooked on fentanyl. He made it to USC as he's wearing a USC football uniform here, never played a game, got kicked out for drug use and drug issues. Today he's in recovery, thank God. But he was duped into fentanyl. Georgia, authorities found fentanyl in hard candies. I want to talk about our own county right here, Riverside County. These are stats over the last few years. Look at 2016, only 2 fentanyl deaths, 2017, 25, 2018, 55 deaths, 2019, 117 deaths, 2020, 227 deaths, and a couple of months ago, our district attorney, Mike Hestron, announced that we're on pace to have 500 deaths from fentanyl in Riverside County. This is happening in every county across the nation. It's not just us. This is nationwide. Let's look at California stats overall. Look at the progression from 2016 through 2021. It's virtually doubling every year. If you don't know someone who's been affected by fentanyl, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I want to touch on something that I call the COVID myth, and it's nothing to do with COVID being a myth. It's the myth that you hear a lot of media reporting that these drug deaths are because of COVID. You hear this all the time. The media reporting that people are overdosing because they're taking more drugs and COVID sent them into this drug use spiral and they're dying. No. What is causing these deaths is a contaminated drug market. All you have to do is look at the stats. They've doubled every year. It's going up despite whether COVID was here or not. Just look at the trend. Who's at risk of dying from fentanyl? Now it's a wide open market. First-time users, casual users, self-medicators, partiers, experimenters, spontaneous users, addicts, of course. I have heard cases of it being used as a date rape drug. Those being deceived by fentanyl. It could even be used in a terrorist attack. This is an important chart, and I'll walk you through it real quick. It tells a story, but you have to understand how traditionally people died from overdoses prior to fentanyl. A traditional overdose is when somebody starts taking drugs, they get addicted to that drug, they gradually need more and more of that drug to get their same fix, to get their same high, and over a several-year period, their body builds up such a tolerance to that drug that at some point, they take so much of that drug to get the fix that they need, now they overdose and die. If you follow this blue linear line follows population growth over a 50-year period. You see it stays fairly linear, and that blue line represents actual traditional overdose deaths. When you get to 2013, 2014, you see a big spike. But what should have happened is it should have followed along that dotted line that you see. Those people on the blue line and extend to the dotted line are people who traditionally would have overdosed. So who makes up that gap? What's this gap of sudden, a higher number of sudden deaths? That goes to the kids that you see dying today, who normally wouldn't have died if it weren't for fentanyl put into the market. Like 14-year-old Alexander Neville, 18-year-old Adriana Davies. I'm going to go through these very quickly because we're pressed for time. But look at their faces, look at their ages, look at their names. These aren't the faces of people you would typically associate with dying from drugs. I want to point something out real quick here with Tristan Becker. This next slide that you see, I'll just go over it really fast. You don't necessarily have to read it real close, but this was taken off of his cell phone by his mother. The drug dealer is actually trying to convince him to buy more drugs so he could get a bigger discount, potentially get his drugs for free, sell the rest to his friends, and have his friends hooked. That's what our young kids are facing. Drug dealers who are trying to get them to sell drugs as well. This one touches my heart because this is close to home. Tyler Gordon, 18 years old, followed 1 year later by his 16-year-old sister. Mother lost both her children to fentanyl. Of course, my daughter Alex, a couple of things I want to point out with Alex real quick. A lot of people like to blame the parents. They think their parents must have done a poor job of raising their kids if their kids are turned into drugs. Well, Alex came from a two-parent household. We're a faith-based family. Both parents loved her more than anything. She grew up playing sports. She was in extracurricular activities. She had only what you would call a normal childhood upbringing. And she still fell victim to this. Alex did suffer from depression, anxiety, and insomnia. And I know her reason for seeking the OxyContin was in an effort to self-medicate. And that cost her life. She was on the track team at Great Oak High School. She was a cheerleader. She was attending Arizona State University on a full academic scholarship. If every one of the preceding kids made the same choice just a few years ago, they would be alive today. Because they most likely would have got the real drug. Fentanyl has changed everything. I want to point this out real quick. I just want to emphasize the danger that's out there, and we need parents and people to start being more upset about this. In the early 2000s, I don't know, there's no kids that are going to remember this, but I'm sure many of your parents might. 2001, shortly after 9/11, public officials and politicians started receiving letters, random letters. Those letters were filled with anthrax. 5 people died and 17 people were sickened. And what ensued from that was, at that time, the largest FBI and law enforcement investigation to date. It was all hands on deck to find this perpetrator that was distributing this poison. Today, we have a poison that's equally as deadly. It's killed hundreds of thousands. It's got hundreds of thousands of people addicted. And it just is brushed aside. There's no uproar. I get this question a lot. Why would drug dealers want to kill their customers? It's purely profit over people. They want to get you addicted. Those people that die along the way are just looked at as collateral damage. I want to tell you right now, fentanyl and synthetic drugs are here to stay, all right? We are at the very beginning of this new synthetic drug era. Here's why. As with traditional plant-based drugs, there's no land needed, no irrigation, no farm workers. Any room can be a makeshift lab. You can make these drugs year-round. Weather doesn't matter. It's quick to make, easy to smuggle in our country. It only takes a little bit to make extraordinary profits. And the cartels and the traffickers operating in Mexico operate with impunity. Parents need to know how easily accessible these drugs are. Okay? Kids are going right on Snapchat. The drug dealer is in their pocket, right on their telephone. It's not scary anymore. Me growing up, I would have had to go to a back alley like that, right? Meet some shady dude and get the drugs and hope I get out of there alive. Nope, today it's as easy as ordering a darn pizza. A few clicks on the phone, you can have it delivered to your door. Snapchat is where most kids are getting the drugs from. There's several social media platforms, but we find Snapchat is the social media platform of choice amongst youth. 95% of our youth between 13 and 25 years old use Snapchat regularly. Why do they use Snapchat? Because drug dealers can message them and make their messages disappear, making it more difficult for law enforcement or anybody to have any idea who they're dealing with. The ability to remain anonymous. You can create accounts using any fake name you want to make. And there's a false sense of security, something that I call the friend delusion. Everybody on Snapchat, just as Facebook, is referred to as a friend, okay? I have a lot of Facebook friends right now. I could probably potentially go out to dinner with maybe 10 of them. The other 1,000 or so, they're not my friends. I met because somebody told me to, or they sent me a friend request. But kids face a false reality when they think all these friends of theirs on Snapchat are actually their friends. You have to be careful about some of the Snapchat features. There's something called the Snap Map. On every Snapchat account, any person out there can find out where your kid is at just by cell phone service without having to know their phone number. This is automatically on their phone. It's up to your kids to actually turn it off. Snapchat gives it to you automatically on. We're winding down here. I want to play one last video real quick, make 2 more comments, and then I'm going to turn it over.
Flooded by hundreds of millions of black market fentanyl pills, the U.S. is in an ongoing crisis. As of August 2021, at least 70,000 deaths over just 1 year were caused by what the CDC calls synthetic opioid overdoses, including thousands of teens and young adults.
2 weeks before my sister passed away, I heard about a friend of mine at my school that passed away from it. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. Then it happened to my sister. Then it happened to a guy I dated. Then it happened to my friend's brother. And it just keeps going on.
Sky Capilouto, Sam Didier, Giselle Briones, and Michael Jarvis are all grieving young lives lost to fentanyl pills they didn't intend to take. Sky's 20-year-old sister, Alexandra, passed away just before Christmas in 2019.
So that day was the worst day of my family's life. And for me, I would feel bad bringing my sadness up to my parents because I know they're just as sad as I am, so I never really talked about it, but it's really hard to go through.
Sam's 17-year-old brother, Zach, passed away in December 2020.
He thought he was getting some kind of just prescription painkiller, like an Oxy or a Percocet, but he didn't get that.
Michael and Giselle's dear friend, Zach Lawler, died in November 2020. He would have been away at college, but like so many others, the pandemic kept him at home.
And with this lockdown, I'm sure it strained his mind. And he was trying to find himself, actually.
I'd gotten to know him, too, over the years while reporting on the class of 2020, and saw a caring and thoughtful young boy turn into a bright and deep young man who talked about wanting to make a difference in the world.
For now, I'm just living in the moment and taking my life one step at a time.
I never in a million years, he was like the last person I thought would die, you know.
The DEA says as many as 1 in 4 pills being sold on the black market as OxyContin, Percocet, or Xanax are counterfeit with a potentially lethal amount of fentanyl, and they look identical to the real thing.
The dealers may not even know which is real or not.
To this generation, says Sky Capilouto, pills have become normalized and incredibly easy to find on social media.
Is it just want Oxy, buy it here? Basically, it's super casual. They'll post a picture and be like, this is the prices. Hit them up.
It's that easy.
Delivered to our house where you think your kid is most safe.
When they describe fentanyl poisoning, immediately it's categorized as, oh, he died of an overdose. Why is that wrong?
When you hear the word overdose, it kind of brings in a bunch of other things into mind that just aren't the case here. This is not the case of someone taking too much of a drug. This is the case of someone being poisoned. It was just the same as if he was going to drink some water and it had cyanide in it.
Part of the problem, Michael Jarvis says, is a lack of education. The old just say no approach doesn't cut it anymore.
There just needs to be a more effective and honest drug education. I mean, honestly, it should be a class even, considering how prevalent it is.
It's so prevalent. It's completely changed the dangers that our generation has faced. And it's something that's easy to take advantage of because the awareness isn't out there. And as a result, there's so many victims out there who have no idea what they're getting into.
While teens often hide their drug use from parents, experts, including the young people we interviewed, say an open and honest conversation with your kids can make a big difference. They say sit down and show them examples of fentanyl pills and their consequences. Also, learn the language that kids are using on social media with emojis and codes often used for drugs. And also, parents advocate for drug education courses in your kids' schools, similar to sex education. The teens we spoke with all said that while they were aware of the dangers, they didn't know how real the problem was until it happened to their family and friends. Guys?
And it happens in the worst way. All right, Natalie, thank you. Those conversations are so critical.
Flooded by hundreds.
Time's limited, so I'm going to touch on a couple of things real quick. I wish I had more time here, but a big part of this that everybody has to be aware of also is the mental health component to this. You know, why are our kids seeking drugs such as painkillers? You know, our country faces a mental health care crisis amongst our youth today, and a lot of that is brought on by social media. Our kids face social media challenges that we are completely unaware of. The cyberbullying, you know, what they're expected to live up to these days, all broadcast on social media. It's led to this mental health care crisis. And I want to touch on something real fast in regards to Narcan. A lot of you are familiar with Narcan. Narcan's you know, a nasal spray that can reverse an opioid overdose, if you want to call it that. I've referred to it as a poisoning, but you get my point. You hear a lot of talk these days about the need for Narcan. Yes, there's a need for it. It has its place. But something I want to tell you, most of the parents that I meet in my shoes all found their kids by themselves. Narcan wouldn't have done any good. There's nobody there to give it to them. So that's where I'm tying in the mental health component of this. And I believe any drug dealer that's selling drugs to somebody who's seeking drugs, that is no different than somebody selling a loaded weapon to somebody who's suicidal. If you're selling these drugs these days, you know there's a chance that the person might die. And that's just despicable. This goes out to any kids out there that are watching this. If you call yourself a true friend, be one. Friends don't let friends die. They call for help no matter what. And that works in two parts. If you have a friend that you know is using drugs, you need to let somebody know, a school counselor, a teacher, a friend, a relative, a church person. But you need to make somebody aware of it. This is my message to parents. If you can't be absolutely 100% certain your child won't die from one drug one time, then you can't guarantee they won't fall victim to fentanyl. I misread that, but you can see it right there for yourself. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Edburn.
If anybody needs to take a 5-minute break, we can take a 5-minute break. This next portion, I think, is as important as the first portion. Agent Byrne will talk about exactly what the feds are doing and what they're seeing. And also we have Deputy Cummings from the Riverside Sheriff's Office here who can kind of address any local issues and what we're seeing here, particularly in Temecula. So we'll give it about 5 minutes and then we'll continue.
Everybody back? Yeah, kinda. So as you guys have heard, my name is Ed Byrne. I'm a special agent for Homeland Security Investigations down in San Diego. You're probably asking who we are, HSI. Nobody ever knows who we are. But we basically are what bore out of originally customs agents. When DHS was created, all the special agents from customs kind of converted over and made HSI. So we had a long time trying to figure out under DHS what we're going to name ourselves. We have more statutory authority than the FBI. And we have a lot of different things that we cover. And we have a lot of agents, but we don't have enough agents. We do everything from your counterfeit handbags, shoes, which cost billions of dollars, to plywood, which is a big problem right now. I know this doesn't sound exciting. And anything entering or exiting the country. And anything on a telephone line, internet, that's all our domain. So DHS, as you kind of know, is created after 9/11 and bore out the tragedies from that. And what they essentially created was this really large police department. And from that, we have some very interesting units that are inside of it that we all kind of attach to. Matter of fact, I still keep learning different things that are inside of DHS. One of those is CWMD, so that's Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction. The FBI used to have this. DHS now has it. And we have NISA. So most of your hacking is now DHS. That's our issue to deal with. There's a whole swath of different things involved in this. So we're heavily involved with the intelligence community. I am specifically involved with a lot of people in the intelligence community, both here and abroad. And fentanyl, I'm going to tell you how I got into this. I had no interest in doing this. I started my career as I was a naval intelligence guy a long time ago. And then I went to the Border Patrol. After the BP, I kind of just slid over into HSI. So I've been kind of disliked by half the population my entire federal career. They call us ICE agents, although that's ERO, that's a different part of ICE and HSI. So I had this really nifty little trick, and I had a whole plan where I was going to go and what I was going to do. So I wanted to end my career doing war crimes and human rights violations, going after Rwandans and Bosnians. And that got curtailed because my route to get there, I was using MDMA, ecstasy, and we were intercepting it. So as everything comes into the United States, it'll go through customs law. It's Title 19. We're the only ones who hold that, which means I can open anything you send out or into the country. I don't need a warrant, nothing. And so that's that's been around over 200 years, that law. And this is a very interesting deal because of how stuff moves today. You guys have all heard recently on the supply chain problems that we have, logistics. We have tons of ships lined up outside of Long Beach. But when things come to the US, we can have a thing called inbonding, which means you may send something or buy something in China, but you live in Guatemala, that's where it's gonna go. And that flight actually lands here first, offloads some stuff that's coming to the US, gonna unload some stuff that's gonna go to Guatemala. Well, we have the right by law to inspect all that stuff. It doesn't matter if it's not coming here, it's landed here. And from that, we start to see this whole culmination with chemicals. So here I was making my way to Europe with MDMA. So as MDMA was coming in, it's usually only made in the Netherlands, kind of in Northern Europe, and they're like wine makers. Those guys are very big on their recipe for making MDMA, which is an interesting thing that's kind of popped itself up. So MDMA and psilocybin, which is mushrooms, are about to become scheduled by the FDA. And if you ever go back and want to read the research on what it does for PTSD, it is amazing. And it's sad that it went decades with nobody being treated with this stuff. They don't get high off it, they do 2 or 3 rounds and they're done, and with a doctor's care. So as I was intercepting MDMA and trying to get back to the Netherlands for 3 months for a vacation and then The Hague, I wound up taking a kilo of a chemical, because I'm not a chemist and there's a whole bunch of crazy chemicals involved in all this stuff. So I took a kilo of it that got seized at JFK. And I told him to send it to me. So the way we usually do that, it's kind of a controlled delivery. We'll take it, we'll go to the door, usually send the postman to the door or postal inspector. And then it goes in. We already have a warrant to enter the house based on it crossing the threshold. It goes inside, and then we're carte blanche. We get to go in. So 2 days later, after I got that kilo that was sent from JFK, I started getting a slew of calls, like in a panic. So it turns out that that was for ANPP, not anything for MDMA. So that was the primary precursor to produce fentanyl, which is a big, big deal, because if it's here, we assume there may be some synthetic or a synthesizing lab for it. It wasn't. It was destined to a mail drop in San Ysidro. I put a tracker inside that box, and then we delivered it. We put sham inside of it. Guy who picks it up is a former Border Patrol agent that I used to know a long time ago. And he was driving it right down to Mexico. So as soon as he got on the ramp to head into TJ, we flashbanged him and we ripped him out of the car and we arrested him. That was the first conviction for that precursor in this country. And so we kind of, from the interview we were doing with him, he was doing different parts of, kind of wheeling, dealing to make money for the Chinese in TJ. And they swap out a lot of things like fish bladders. It's a crazy other part of customs. And so that was the first introduction I had to fentanyl. So that was in 2016. I heard about it. I didn't know anything else about it. And since that day, I have become the entire government's expert on fentanyl, on its precursors, on its movement, on its synthesis, everything about it on the enforcement side. And so, like I said, I didn't want to be here. I definitely didn't want to meet any of these people who have lost their children. But I'm here, and I'm grateful I am here. So that's a little bit about kind of how the route was for me. This thing moves really fast. So as soon as we got that conviction, Maine DOJ and DC, they wanted an initiative to go after precursors. And they weren't really coming here. They were coming here a little bit. They'd land here, and we knew everything was going into Mexico. It was not being synthesized here. That's a good thing. We didn't want it synthesized here. That poses a serious problem. Matt talked a little bit before about the history of fentanyl. So that it goes actually back a little bit further. So fentanyl has kind of risen up. This would be the 5th time, but this is a sustained time. And there's a guy named George Marquardt. He's called the Walter White of Wichita. And this is a dude who I don't believe even graduated 8th grade, but he fully synthesized fentanyl by himself. He's just one of these crazy chemist brains. So he had made it and sent it to one guy who was a supplier. So in the summer of sometime in the 1990s, 1980s, there was a bunch of deaths. A couple hundred people had died, heroin users in Baltimore and Philadelphia. And that had come from just a supplier, one supplier that Marquardt knew, and he made that chemical for him, or he made fentanyl for him. So they caught up to him and he got arrested. He went to jail. He died, I think, in 2016 after he had gotten out of prison. But there's some very interesting literature on him. He's a pretty fascinating person. He made his own mass spectrometer, which I carry a mass spectrometer in the back of my car. It's a $75,000 piece of machinery to test for all kinds of dope, for explosives, chemical weapons. And this guy made it himself, so fairly interesting guy. So as it has kind of popped up, it has never really been called fentanyl. And this is where we in the government really have failed, because we're very slow. Government is never fast. It's like an aircraft carrier that's turning. So we don't react to things like immediate turns. There's these long sloping turns to kind of get everything moving in one direction. So when we look at how fentanyl really got here, there's a documentary. I hate to plug myself, but I'm on a documentary on an HBO called The Crime of the Century. So this is a 4-hour documentary about, basically they did a whole thing on the history of the opioid problem and what happened here and where the pharmaceutical industry came into play. And they did this because I spoke at the National Opioid Summit 3 years ago in Atlanta, and I wouldn't let them take any pictures, but they drew my entire PowerPoint, which is pretty fascinating. And then they interviewed us 22, 23 times, and they came out and followed us in that thing on one of our deaths. So we got here because we're Matt, and most of you are very familiar with this. We're not going to beat the brow on this thing. The pharmaceutical industry has a lot to do with this. They basically made heroin synthetically, and then they pushed it out there. And they pay a little bit of a fine, essentially. It'll be like the tobacco settlement. You're going to see states balance their budgets. You're not going to see families like the Capolitos or anyone else that has gone through the tragedy of all this, the cost. They're really going to see probably pennies of it on the dollar. And the pharmaceutical industry went ahead and made naloxone. So naloxone is the reversing agent. So the R and the U receptor, I keep 2 of them in my pocket now because I'm going to tell you why I have 2 instead of 1. So this is basically like a wash. So on your brain, you have a membrane that goes all the way around it. And this is where you have to kind of understand what fentanyl really is and why it's important to have. So it was made originally for open heart surgery. So when we deliver morphine into the body, it's usually about 20 minutes before it really starts to take effect. To get through that membrane is not very easy for morphine. It's too thick. And so this is where chemists set out to try to find a new solution to this. You don't want people waking up during open heart surgery. So Janssen from Janssen Pharmaceutical, he actually comes up with this. And that turns out to be fentanyl. And what fentanyl does is like a ghost. So it doesn't get deterred by the membrane. It just slides right through it. It's like just goes right through, is never delayed, and goes right through. And that became the magic of why it became so kind of important in the medical industry. If we've seen kids who have been blown to pieces by IEDs in combat, lost almost all their limbs, and they're hit with fentanyl immediately. They're usually given a lollipop. It's taped onto their wrist or what they have left. They stick it in their mouth, and that buys you enough time to keep them out of shock. And we save them because of this. So this is an incredible medication. It's a hard thing to look at this and say, we should take it completely out of play because we really don't have replacements for this. They're all on the same synthesis and chemical frontier. And everything is moving in that direction. Everything. We will not have organic drugs in 5 years. We'll have them very expensive. Cocaine will be extremely expensive. We had the lowest poppy grow in Mexican history this year. We now see that is synthesized. It appears to be black tar, but it's actually xylazine and fentanyl mixed together, added with some Coca-Cola syrup, heated it up, put a bittering agent in it, smells like, tastes like. It isn't. We have heroin addicts who are 40-year users or maintenance guys. They don't get high off it. They buy fentanyl because they're terrified of buying heroin and getting hit with the fentanyl. I mean, that's how bad this whole thing kind of turned out. The way they got onto this, and this is an interesting story, the Sinaloa cartel needs to be given some credit for what they do in their business practice. So in 2016, when the DEA decided to go to war against the pharmaceutical industry and all the pill mills, they went out, they were smashing it. On your news, you kept watching them smash in doors, taking out all these people with all these pills, and they did not pay attention to their flank. So roughly 66% of the illicit market at that time that was being sold for addicts and all that, it was the Marincrot M30. It was that blue pill. And that is why we see that blue pill. The cartel looked at it as, we have instant marketability. We'll just make it right now and use fentanyl instead of putting any OxyContin in it. They did push it here originally as Mexican Oxy. And we saw this transition over the course of the time. So 3.5 years, our team has been in existence. Our team trains almost everybody. We're about to go stand up the entire state of Hawaii on doing these. And they're very trying cases. These are horrible cases. And we're now beginning to hit this phase where a lot of our victims are beginning to change too. So on the front end of this, we had a lot of people, I think we're roughly around 11 million people were probably addicted in some capacity to opioids. They were prescribed. You had a lot of coal miners, people in the Rust Belt, anyone who was doing labor type jobs with repetitive motion injuries, they got these prescriptions. And most of them did not abuse them. They took them, they got to work in the morning, they came home, they took another one, they went to bed. But they didn't know they were addicted to it until it got cut off, when the spigot got hit. And that caused a serious problem. The first transition to this problem came when the DEA forced the pharmaceutical companies to change OxyContin into a base that was like a gum. Makes it harder to snort and harder to burn to smoke it. That was the beginning of it. And then after that took place, once we saw them finally go after the pharmaceutical industry, the cartel was ready to, you have 11 million customers. The heroin supply in the world is like De Beers with diamonds. You all hate paying how much you pay for a diamond, but and they got them in boxes up there up in Northern Europe. They control the flow. The Afghanis do the same thing. Those warlords, they'll stock that stuff for years. But remember, those things get affected by war, by interdiction, by drought, by floods, all kinds of stuff. And they need land to grow it and eradication efforts that can go on. When we synthesize fentanyl, you can get this done in less than an hour in a bathroom. That's 1 kilo. If that's pure fentanyl, the money you will make off of that, you'll never make off of 10 fields of heroin. That's how much the profit margin is. So it became clear to the cartel that we had a lot of addicts, and there wasn't going to be enough heroin to supply them. It just didn't exist. And they wanted to make money, right? So here they came up with this idea. They kind of saw it because they make all this methamphetamine down south, right? So they're doing, the super labs down there are converting meth. About 6 years ago, I bought a pound of methamphetamine for $13,000. I thought I had pulled the greatest coup off ever on that deal. We now can buy it for $500. That tells you the problem we have here. The methamphetamine problem is through the roof. Plus, methamphetamine used to have an issue with yield. So when it was produced, you had D-meth, which was like a dirty kind of byproduct. So 50% of a cook was really not usable. But they've learned how to clean that, so they get 100% yield off of what they make. So you've got them pushing both synthetics out, and some of these words are super important. And you guys are the people who are going to really do anything to change any of the issues going on. Politicians are not going to listen to us. They're going to listen to parents, family members who've lost people. This is like MAD back in the, the 1980s. It's very unusual. We just don't see anybody really reacting to it. And you talk about the amount of people who have died. Even in those numbers, they're shallow, because if you get into a car accident after you smoke some fentanyl and you pass out and you go through the windshield, you die of blunt force trauma. Not fentanyl, but that's what caused it, right? That's what killed you. So we're in a tight fight here because we're not going to get rid of fentanyl on the medicinal side. We didn't get people here onto this drug because of fentanyl being prescribed. That is just what was filling the void. That's what they were able to make. And the reason they could make this is to get one drug to market at the FDA. Today it costs almost $1 billion to get one all the way through stage trials. When they made fentanyl, they made, I believe, there's around a little over 900, between 915, 920 analogs of it. But they weren't good enough. They had problems. Sometimes it makes people's stomachs bleed. They found that fentanyl was the best of all those things, and so the analogs did not go to market except for carfentanil. That was used on a different level. And so all of those recipes, they're all public record, every one of those recipes. Today, There are 6,680 some odd analogs of fentanyl being made. These are guys who are like chemists, just in college or whatever. Most of them can't be stabilized and pulled out of a petri dish, but they get their name on it. That's how they do it. They make a new chemical. And this is now happening because we're in the middle of a transition where we're starting to see other synthetic opioids that never made it to market. Some were used in Japan in the 80s, but these are all the same thing. There are just literally tens of thousands of recipes for synthetic opioids. And so we're just not going to get rid of the problem until we educate everybody. And the biggest issue that I've had is that the education has been horrendous because nobody wants to really put it out. Politicians do not want you to see certain things. Everybody's kind of trying to get a grasp of where we're at. We need to get what's called a standard in the government. And that standard is, we've all been told kind of about the safety issues, right? So you're going to see, take you through this. So this is our team as part of it. So this is how we were created. I won't go into very much of this. We're very lucky. There's no other place in the country that has the same resource value that we have. We're very lucky to have it. And we fused what's called the Purple Task Force out of this. Feds usually don't get along with each other, but we did. We got along very well. And so when we created this thing, we have bore now into this enormous type of training and expert unit for all of this stuff, including fentanyl. So I get fentanyl all over me. It's probably on me now. It's probably I know it's all over the back of my car, but I test everything, back of my car. I've had one major exposure. For you Leo guys out there, do not call the fire department if you get it on your clothes, because they're gonna come and strip you down and hit you with the hose, and that video will outlast you. You'll be dead. You'll be dead for 100 years. That video will be floating around the internet. So is it dangerous? It's extremely dangerous. But we have to put these things into context. So I think when the DEA first came out, when they started to seeing a lot of fentanyl, 2015, 2016, when we started to see it move in from the south, they eventually put out a notice and they told everybody, they advised against field testing. It froze the entire country, law enforcement. So gone are the days of Miami Vice where they taste testing their cocaine out there on the boat and all that good stuff. People are terrified of it. They're terrified of it. And can it go through your skin? Yes, it can. However, it takes a ton to get through your skin. It's the best organ you have. You need a solvent to open your skin. That's exactly how fentanyl is on in a patch. It's got a solvent. It's a time-release solvent. I could put fentanyl powder on your arm and just walk away from you and come right back. It doesn't like melt into your arm. It's a powder. And so that's the issues. We have to get onto a real kind of understanding of how dangerous it is and when it becomes super dangerous. Where it's most dangerous is to small children. They are the ones who are getting, it's not first responders, it's small children. They are the ones who are getting hit with it. And they're getting hit with it because they crawl around on the floor and they stick everything in their mouth. And because they do that, we wind up seeing a lot of kids OD. Luckily, a lot of them are resilient, but we have, the first one I had was 10 and a half months old. So I'm at 400. It's actually a little bit higher than that, but I had kind of played it off. That's 400 dead people from these drugs that I've gone to in 3.5 years. That's a lot of people, including Alexander's house, because Alexander's, she'd be his niece, right? His aunt. So I had a partner, I knew her from the Border Patrol. I brought her into this team when she came to HSI and I was in HSI. So she was my partner in Team 10. She left, she went over to child exploit. And in June, she called me in the morning and made us aware of what had happened to Alexander. And my entire team was in Orange County at their house in less than an hour. So when we talk about people who get affected by this, and law enforcement has a position of traditionally calling people junkies, and it's an unfortunate scenario because this is not like any other scenario we've ever faced before. Many of these people were basically, they were prescribed into addiction, unknowingly. I had a girl who was 13 years old that was given 3 synthetic opioids for menstrual cramps. Today, if a doctor did that, they would be immediately hauled out of that. But that was the kind of the flavor of the day, right? They didn't have any curbs on them. They didn't have any monitoring. We have people who get cancer treatment. What do they put in your chemotherapy? So it's poison, right? We're putting poison in the body. They have a lot of stringent regulations on monitoring that. And you look at these opioids that we were putting in people, 0 monitoring, 0. Less than 5% chance of addiction, all these different numbers they threw around. I mean, a lot of it's criminal. The other part that's criminal is that naloxone, the reversing agent, was $1 a dose when it licensed. And it was really just out because they needed it in the hospital, you know, to bring people out because they used fentanyl. All of these people who had COVID in the last 2 years that have been getting breathing assistance, they are on fentanyl. That drug-induced coma is from fentanyl. And so naloxone is important. And so now it's $167 for the box. And they give us a good deal. Like, I think we get it at $44 a box. So that's kind of criminal in itself, but I won't go there. So in San Diego, we have a kind of unique thing. We have most of the dope in this country comes through those 2 ports in San Diego. It's transient, it comes through, it comes up into this county, comes to San Bernardino, Orange County, and LA, and then we start moving, it starts moving on the highway pipelines, trucking pipelines, goes east. The pills that they're talking about have been killing people for 6 years, even though now it seems to be the push, better late than never. The pill pipeline is primarily through Arizona, but we get a lot of it still here. Our deaths in San Diego have changed. When we first started doing this, it was young people, you know, 17, 18, 19, 20, and they were dying from the pills, smoking them. Now everybody's dying from powder in San Diego because of the cost efficiency ratio for that. The pills have a specific amount. Mexicans have gotten pretty accurate at how much they're getting in each pill. And you know, as people get addicted to it and they raise their tolerance level to it, 1 dosage unit is a pill. If that pill were going for $12 and you were to buy a gram of dope, it seems more cost effective. So I think that's why a lot of them have moved to it. We still have a lot of pills, but the people don't die from them as much as they did. Now it's primarily powder. Deputy Cummings is from Riverside here. What do you guys see here? Is it still pills that are most of the ODs? So this is why the wording is always kind of super important to us. We have pet peeves about it. So we used to see in the very beginning when we would have a multi-incident, which would be usually, you know, more than one person overdosing at a scene, whether they both passed or both saved or whatever, we would go to it. And this was almost always the belief that it was cocaine. Now, I've been around a lot of cocaine. I had been chasing the Amesco brothers down in Colombia years ago. So cocaine has a thing they call it fish sheen. It's like a fish scale on the outside of it. It's very sheeny, and that's usually at the very end of the wash when they get the diesel out of it. Fentanyl is extremely powdery because it's cut with a wide range of any white powder. This is how they're profiteering so much. A kilo that comes across the port technically has very little fentanyl in it by weight. And most of it is synthetic sugars. A lot of it's synthetic sugars. And so that number is another thing we need to kind of take into consideration. If a person dies from the overdose, They have done everything in their power to bypass their body's ability to protect itself. So we all have nose hairs because that's to stop particulate matter from flying around and getting in our lungs, right? So if you were to walk through a poof of powder, that powder is still very low in concentration with fentanyl, and then you're gonna have all your mechanisms are gonna be protecting you. So when they smoke it, that's a direct thing to get it straight back into their, basically right on the brain immediately. And when they snort it too. If we hear or see people vomiting, that's why we never see them orally take these pills. Fentanyl will make them vomit. Usually it's if they've snorted some. And remember, you can have 5 people take one bag and put those lines out, and not everybody's gonna have the same reaction because we can't guarantee where all the fentanyl is in a bag. I've seen more of it probably, I think, than anybody, and I can tell you it's fake, but I cannot tell you the concentration for any of it. And this thing is kind of like breathing. So somebody asked about marijuana before with fentanyl. So that should get out of your head because what did I tell you the main cuts were? What's that? Sugars, synthetic sugars, right? So they burn at a much different temperature than organic marijuana does. And what would happen is you're basically going to carbonize it, you're gonna burn it and knock the power out of it. It's not gonna be worthwhile to even try to do that. So we just don't see, it can happen, some people may put some on there, but that's not gonna be anybody kind of putting it on there for a cost-effective purpose. Where I would tell you to worry is in the vapes. So we encountered the first one in San Diego. We had a Navy chemist who taught at Annapolis, and then he came out here to San Diego. He got addicted to opioids. They let him resign his commission, and we responded to his condo. His girlfriend was still alive, and they had pure powder, which is something rare. That came from China. Those pure ones came from China. They can last, a gram of the pure powder could last these guys, especially a chemist who knows how to break it down, could last years. And so we saw the vape production little thing she had set up. In her interview, she talked about how they would they would smoke vapes at Humphreys by the Bay, and they got kicked out. And they're smoking carfentanil. And so we don't know what the vapor off is, secondhand smoke gas off from that. We haven't really seen that tested very much. So we want the information to be accurate for you instead of kind of a lot of the hyperbole that has gone out with the fear tactic. We want it to be more accurate. We should never, ever not consider performing any first aid on anyone who is down from it. It's very hard for you to get that transfer. You can treat it like a bloodborne pathogen is what we tell law enforcement to do most of the time, but not run away from it. I'm sorry, I've been up since very early this morning. So fentanyl will not, like I said, it won't go through your skin unless we have something to push it through. We know that there are people, bad actors, that want to push it through. And when we tell people now what we do, we are a different kind of, we are a hybrid investigator. I've tagged it as a sentinel. We're sentinel investigators. So if you take a homicide investigator and a narc detective, that's the fusion of what we are. We have to go into a house where there's a young person who's dead, the worst day of the life of that family, and they see 10 feds walk into their house. And so we have to be able to console them, to give them the grieving, a space that they need in the beginning, and explain who we are and why we're there, and that we're tracking down the dealer who sold it. Now, in all these jurisdictions, it's different, and we have politics to blame. The state of California, this is a tough state. You had a state senator from this region who tried to put through something we just do as a habit, but not by law, which is the Watson Advisal, which was created for DUIs. They read it during sentencing, kind of says, you understand that you could hurt somebody, kill somebody if you're driving drunk, and then they're really liable for it if they do it again later on. So we instituted this for fentanyl about 2.5 years ago, and then she tried to put it up and the committee shot it down. It just makes no sense. That's the most basic thing we could try to get forward, and we're just not getting any of these things done at the state. So the federal government, we're the ones who have the heavy hammer, and that was after Lenny Bias is what the law was made from. In the early 1980s, he got drafted to the Celtics from Maryland. That was like his dream to go that way. But he had a heart condition that nobody knew about, and he had a guy who sold him a bunch of cocaine when they went out and celebrated. His heart blew up and he died. So Congress passed this law. So it's kind of a kingpin law. It's a 20-year minimum ban. There is no sway in the sentencing, and they have not really challenged this until the last 2 months. We've actually gone to trial twice. We tore through those trials. They're gone, but this law, people are going to say eventually we're putting people away for 20, and there are different degrees of this. We have people, we have a case in San Diego. We had a kid who was a combat veteran from Iraq who died, and he was a struggling addict himself. The kid who gave it to him was also a combat vet who's in a wheelchair. He had a 50 cal round go around his vest, and the heat of that tip hit his spine. So he's condemned to a wheelchair, and he was, legitimately asking his girlfriend, are these things legit? And she was telling him yes, and he gave the pill to him, and he killed him. Do we charge that guy? The families usually will tell you no. The family of the decedent will tell you no. They don't ever want to see that other kid get put through that either. He's a sufferer too. But, that's where we have to kind of decide these different actors. All right. So when we talk about where we're going today, we have now changed everything in the last 3 years. Our victims, our dope is changing. This is a constantly moving thing, which is why it's sad that we didn't have all this information up front accurate in the very beginning, because then you guys would be able to kind of listen to it and it would be more accurate. The news is still pushing the same wrong words. The lacing, there's no lacing in it. It's purely a fentanyl fake pill. That's it. And we're past the days, for the most part, of consumers, young people in their teens, everyone else, kind of, ignorantly not knowing what it is. We had a lot of addicts that just didn't want to admit that they were taking fentanyl. San Diego, we have this unique thing. We call them a commuter drug user. You can get on the trolley, you can go down, you can get your stuff, you can come back in an hour and a half every day. So it's here. It's a very tough battle to fight, but this is going to take, this is what my belief is. People can tell me I'm wrong about this, but I think that the only place we have to draw the line here is 8 to 11-year-olds. They are the ones that are going to have to be the kids who break it. They're smart. They know how to Google. We can't just say no. We cannot lie to them because they can see the truth. And the problem is with these pills, we are all naturally inclined to accept it. As kids, the first time we ever got sick and a doctor gave us some medication, gave our mom a slip of paper, went to the pharmacy, got the stuff, we got it 3 times a day and we felt better. We are imprinted for these pills, this acceptance of these pills. Weed is not the gateway drug. I'll tell you, it is Xanax. Xanax is at every scene we go to. The things they write that script for are amazing. I've never had it, but I mean, it's crazy. Hangnail or a bad headache, you can get Xanax. But that is an attunement to pills. And Xanax makes it even more complex because it's usually in a bar with four scores on it. The doctor will usually prescribe it to you and tell you, if you don't think it's working enough, take 1 more score off. So add 1, or if you want to reduce it, take it down a score, giving you the power to adjust your medication. And we have lost this natural trail of maturation. We could teach our children everything. I was lucky my daughters made it through this whole thing. But you can teach them everything. There's always that 5% at the very end that's built in. We used to call it experimentation with drugs, right? You could take cocaine a couple of weeks in college, that's experimenting, smoke weed, whatever they're gonna do. It does not kill you, does not pose the risk of killing you the first time you ingest it. Fentanyl does. And that's where we have to break this trend. I will never be able to come up with a catchphrase for talking to an 8 to 11-year-old, but somebody is. Somebody out here is a genius at this, talking to children that young, and we have to be able to get them to understand that they are it. If we lose that group, we do not convince that group of kids that they really need to tone away from that whole thing, we're going to be in a whole lot of trouble. They have not changed this pill yet, but if they do change this pill, we're going to be in trouble because it's going to take us that much longer to catch up to what it is they're using. They can make a Vicodin. They can make anything. So we have to be cognizant of that too. This is where we are because, I'm going to get real quick. So where we are today is drugs usually pose a singular thing. So we have marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin. So these are organics for the most part, except for meth, but they are the staple of the drug world and drug consumers, and they are not immediate killers. They only have one purpose. California, in some places you could say marijuana is medicinal. That's an argument for another thing, but the other drugs are nothing more than drugs. I believe there's a little bit of cocaine used and still some nasal medication, but they are just one use. That's it. Fentanyl's got 4. So we've talked about 2 of them. What are they? The medication purpose, right, the really important thing, and then the nefarious side where everybody's using. Does anybody have guesses what the other 2 are? It's the perfect murder weapon to use against a person right now, especially. I was acting kind of weird, hiding stuff from me or whatever. I just wet it on my fingers, put it right around your beer bottle. That'll be it. And they won't know for 5 to 6 months when the autopsy's done. And by then, there'll be no clues left to it. And it's happening around the country. We had the first one years ago in San Diego from the medical examiner's office. But the 4th one, does anyone know what that is? Anybody? Anybody? So it's a terror weapon with state actors. It's a terror weapon. And so we've seen it. The Russians used it in 2002. They had Chechen rebels who strung the Moscow theater up with a massive amount of explosives. So Spetsnaz units moved everybody out, away from the building, and gassed it using a formulation of carfentanil gas. What they failed to do was tell medical personnel that that's what they had put in there, which they could have used naloxone to reverse it. We had a lot of people die. But that is a nasty, nasty type of thing to do, to compress it into an aerosol. We know that Antifa in 2019 in December chattered about dropping it from a drone on top of a second rights amendment, march in Virginia. It did not take place because DRMSO, which is the solvent that they were going to use, opens your skin immediately, but it does also, for some reason, it counters fentanyl, kind of almost wipes it out. But they'll get there. They're all going to get there. And these are the groups. You look at where our team developed from just being a death team, and these are the people who we deal with now. So when I told you that I track this and I have to deal with it all over the world, a good chunk of the chemicals are coming from American companies. The synthesis chemicals, protein bases, we cannot regulate those things. They're used in everything, food, a ton of different stuff. I wanted to show you this. So this is who I am part of now, all of these groups. How I ever thought I was going to be doing some MDMA a couple years ago, going to the Netherlands. And instead, I've got the bio and agro defense facilities. These are all people worried about opioids at our national level. This is all national security level things. These can be used as harassing agents. And so all of these people are coming up with ways to test it, ways to detect it. It's a lot of money, and we're going to be spending a ton of money in the near future, and a lot of it's going to be graphed on the rehab side, because ONDCP at the White House, they want to get back to harm reduction, rehab, give everybody these opportunities, but we have many states that are unregulated in this industry. So you know how that goes. People go in there and rob the place blind before anybody gets treated, and then they're gone. So that's, pretty much what I wanted to get across to you is like, this is a growing, breathing type of problem. The drug itself changes, how it's delivered can change, and we have to, as parents, we have to kind of stay up on top of this because we deal with a lot of deaths in hotel rooms. And what I tell people is I've been uncomfortable the fact that we leave a scene that was ours, body comes out, we process it, but we can't see all the powder that might go in a rug. I know that the Marriott is going to spend the money to clean that hotel room. I can't guarantee it against some other hotels. So we call hazmat sometimes. They'll red tag it. But if you had some family come from Iowa to come to SeaWorld with 4 little kids, and they had a body in there and dope had kind of gone into the rug, I'm terrified of all that. I don't want to be the one who let that room go. And this is the problem this poses. We're red tagging houses, because it's in the walls now from people smoking it. If you smell burnt buttered popcorn, that is fentanyl being smoked. Are there any other questions? Comments? Questions, anybody? You're welcome. Yes, ma'am. There's no dog that can detect fentanyl in the United States except for CBP's dogs. They're the only dogs that are trained for it. Well, what do you have here? We fought a battle for a long time to get AEDs in schools, right? Or in airports and everywhere. There's an AED somewhere in close proximity for the most part. Naloxone, technically, should be given to everyone in this country. I don't care how young they are. It can do no harm. I cannot do anything negative to you. I'd have to actually physically drown you with it to do anything negative. So it poses no problem on that side. And I'm going to tell you what my 400th death was. So a week and a half ago, I had been kind of putting off on some of the deaths. I had my partner go in there. I can officially say that it's not a numbered death, and he goes and tests. And so he did this in one of the locations downtown. So I was sitting in the car, and he started texting me the pictures of the test he was running. And while I was sitting there looking at it, I looked up and I was changing the radio, and this guy came across the crosswalk and stepped up on top of the sidewalk, and he had a shopping bag in his hand, and I was staring at him, and he dropped the bag, and he crumbled like Jell-O. So I deployed his first Narcan within 18 seconds of him dropping to the ground. I hit him again with 2 more doses over this. When we were done with CPR for us, we gave it to fire. Atropine, they never really got a solid, consistent pulse with him. They get him up to Mercy, and they call it, and so they call him deceased. So that was my 400th death. So I was avoiding death until death came to me and decided it was going to give me 400. And people shouldn't have to go through that. 400. You ask any homicide detective how many bodies they've dealt with in cases. This is a lot of people. A lot of people. That's it.
And just to address your issue about what we're doing, at least in this school district, it's something we've been talking about since this past summer, and this is one of our first steps in getting the education part out. From here, we'll develop a plan to get it out to more of the kids. at the secondary schools for sure. And we're also working on a Narcan naloxone program that our school deputies already carry that. And we're looking at having our nurses and other staff at the high schools and the middle schools that'll have the Narcan. And in addition to that, just like I said, it's really important for everybody to have these conversations with their kids and just let them know. I mean, the video itself, we want that pushed out, and it kind of really puts it in perspective for everybody. Yes. Why he carries two?
Because of that same reason. So I deployed one, and I was out. I always keep one. Our whole team keeps one in their pocket. You will never be able to self-defend if you're not doing yourself. If you're getting infected from it and manufactured, you're in for pain. Completely open air. And so, I deployed that first one. I had done another deployment, and we saved a guy about 7 months ago. Because of his death, he's walking back from India, not talking to the person who's there. Back there, he was in. We revived him. He would be 3 days later. And so we always keep it with us because it's going to be on one of our own guys for the most part that we would have to deploy. And I've deployed it on civilians.
And I could speak, when I was with the sheriff's department, we'd have deputies, we'd show up on scene and there might be 3 or 4 people that have overdosed because they were all thought that they were doing cocaine. It wasn't, and the next thing you know, you have 4 people passed out, not breathing, and so deputies get there and are able to administer it because usually the law enforcement gets there before the fire department just by the nature of they're out on patrol and are able to access it quicker. So the deputies, thank goodness years ago we started that program, and endless amounts of people that the deputies have saved up here and down in San Diego with that.
If you want to understand how many people have been saved, there's a program called OD Max. We, for some reason, do not have it in San Diego because the county has been fighting us or fighting to put it in. I know this county has it. If you go to that, it's a public piece, and it is deployment for Narcan for death scene. And you will see what I factored in is right around 70 Narcan deployments per death. And that's how much police time, fire time, emergency room time is being taken up by all of these ODs. It is crazy. Some of these people will be hitting Narcan and immediately pop up. You have to be careful because they'll pop up and hit you. There's a case in Wisconsin where the guy was on the bus was brought to. They asked him to come off the bus to check him out. And eventually, when the police officer before he sat into the ambulance, he wouldn't do it. He turned around, he pulled the firearm, and he deployed the fentanyl or the Narcan on. And that's what we're dealing with.
They want us to talk on the microphone so they can hear it. And I do know that just here in the valley, and Deputy Cummings can probably speak to it, but just recently I know that there's been teenage kids here in Temecula that they've had to use Narcan on from overdoses. So it definitely is something we're seeing here.
My name is Chris Cummings. I work here at the Temecula station on our narcotics unit or special enforcement team. We're a low-level to major level narcotics unit for just the city. We have almost completely transitioned to just a fentanyl team. So everything that all the speakers have said to you guys from the federal level and China and Mexico, it's here in our city. I live in the city. My 3 kids are going to go to school here. So it hits home for me. How many people in the room go to Old Town? Enjoy Old Town, yeah? Good place. I'll keep mine brief because I know we're running out of time, but within the last 2 weeks, we got a guy outside one of our local motels with a 1/4 pound of fentanyl, not to mention the 1,230 pills he had on him. If you're looking at the numbers for about a 1/4 pound of fentanyl, whether we don't know the purity of it or what it was cut with, but at 2 milligrams is a lethal dose, right, based on the numbers. Talking about 56,000 fatal doses in a brick that was about that big right here in our city, where half this room just raised their hand to, they like to go, where I like to take my family. So I'm here to answer local questions if you guys have, the trends that we're seeing, what to look for within our city. So ask away if you got some. Go ahead. We have a YAT program, which is kind of based on what you're talking about. I don't know, because I don't work in that program, if they have, fentanyl section where they start telling these kids that you got to stay away from it. I think the reason for stuff like this is us as friends and family and parents, it's now on us to make sure our kids know how crazy deadly this stuff is. So it might be something good to talk to the juvenile court system about. I couldn't tell you if they do. Anybody else? Go ahead.
How do you know it's fentanyl? When you get the package and you see it, how do you know it's fentanyl and not something else?
We're trained to know what it looks like. Like I mentioned earlier, when we were talking about the cocaine and fentanyl, to a layperson, maybe someone sitting here might think that a powder white substance is going to be cocaine, but we have testing kits and ways that we test at our unit, and just a lot of training experience that lets you know what it is, based on what the guy looked like, the symptoms he was exhibiting, the fact that we found the M30 pills on him, and a lot of these guys, because they're afraid of cops dying when we open their packages or how deadly the stuff is, we'll ask them, hey, what is that? And he told us right away. He goes, hey, it's fentanyl, be careful. So yeah. Go ahead.
Seems like this presentation that Matt gave should be given to every one of our middle schoolers and high schoolers. Are you allowed to give that presentation to them?
That's probably something for the school district, yeah.
Yes, and that's the plan. We just want to make sure when we give it to them, we provide our teachers with some information too, and be able to answer questions. And but that is definitely the plan. We And I'll relay that, and I know that the district does have programs and counselors and things like that set up. It's just maybe a matter of sometimes it's slipping through, and other things. This fentanyl thing is relatively new to everyone, so how we address it and what kind of stuff we come up down the line, but And if anybody's in that situation, I know Don and Kelly are over here from our student support, and they definitely have resources that they can advise. And if you guys can raise your hands, and if anybody, when we get finished, has any questions or wants any kind of assistance like that, they can definitely get anybody pointed in the right direction. Or if you want to give any input or anything that you think that we could do better, for sure, talk to them or talk to me. Back there? There's 27,000 students in the Temecula Valley School District. Yes. Well, yeah, we put this out, and we actually had 70,000 people view the flyer that we put out. We kept track of that, so there were 70,000 people that actually looked at this flyer and knew about this. And we've discussed this as a team on, you know, this kind of being our first step at this education process, and we'll just continue and build on it from here on the campaign, and how we present this to the kids at the schools and that type of thing are things that we're discussing, and like I said, putting the video out and whatever things we can do. But I agree, I would have loved to seen the whole place full. We are streaming this live. I don't know how many people are watching online, but you know, I'm with you. I wish all 27,000 kids could be here and see this and understand this. But the goal is, from just the people here, is that if anybody here can, like I said, kind of talk to their friends, and it you know, that would help. And I, you know, because of my line of work, what I was doing before this, I saw what this was doing. So 3-4 years ago, my kids, I had these conversations with them and their friends about this, almost to the point where they're probably rolling their eyes at me every time I would talk to them about it. But it's something that 3 or 4 years ago was scaring the crap out of me for the kids. And so as we move forward, like I said, the more people that understand it and know it, and the more of these we can do, and the more education we get out, the more people we can save. Back there.
I mean, we'll let you bring it back through the port with it if you have the script with you, if you got a script here or down there. But that's a buyer beware type of thing in the pharmacies. There's a lot of fake medications down there too, not just, you know, where they make it an actual narcotic to get people high. There's a lot of different things that they make down there that are different than what we have as FDA standard here. So it's like, that's the buyer kind of beware down there. I know a lot of people go down for their medicines because it's cheaper. So that's a research issue.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I'll tell you what I tell my kids, and I tell them, and what my fear is just kind of what was addressed a little bit is, you're at a party one night and you have a couple beers and someone says, hey, take this half a pill of ecstasy or you know, Xanax or whatever it is, that the odds are that is counterfeit, and what you're taking could kill you. It's not like when I was in high school and college and people were doing ecstasy, nobody was dying from it. They might get addicted to it, but it's different now. As far as like hard candies and all that, you know, like they were talking about, I mean, you know, bad actors can do bad things, and so those are the kind of things that are out of our control, if someone was to lace something like a candy or something. But what is in your control is to be able to talk to your kids about the repercussions of just that one time, that one bad choice, and make sure that they talk to their friends about it. and that even if even if a kid isn't aware of what it can do, his friend might be there to say, hey bro, don't do that. Like, I know what I saw the video, like, don't do it. I have a freshman in college, and I've given him this same speech probably 10 times.
Yes, ma'am. We have not come across it yet. Our team has not seen that in the city yet. Go ahead. Yeah.
We're definitely working on that, just what the structure will be and how we do it. That'll be up to some other people, but that's the goal, is to an assembly or what to reach the most, the most kids is the goal. Yes, ma'am.
So I can tell you this, in Riverside County, we're fortunate. Our sheriff and our district attorney have taken this very seriously. They are leading the way in charging fentanyl dealers with murder in a state where it's very difficult to do so. And yeah, our sheriff and our district attorney need to be commended for that. So Riverside County is the wrong place to get caught dealing this crap. You will get charged with murder if you are. So they're working on getting it out of our county. So,
for sure, that's Agent Burns' team down in San Diego. That's all they do. So when they go on a fentanyl death, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're looking at it as an investigation, basically as a homicide investigation. So as they go through and try to figure out where the source of supply came from, that type of thing, to hold people accountable.
You mentioned fentanyl, but what is the fentanyl?
Carfentanil?
Oh, carfentanil.
It's, what is it, 10 times stronger than fentanyl? 100?
The days of recreational drug use have to be over. That's the only way to stop this. That's the only way you're going to live.
Yes. And again, I go back, I agree 100%. The more people we can fill up and the more students we can reach, and I've talked to my partners about it, and that's the goal. And so we will, you know, definitely the goal is to see how many kids we can get this message to. And again, this was our first night doing this, and we've talked about doing more of these in different settings, ways that we can reach the most amount of people. That's definitely our goal. So tonight was the first step. Thanks everybody for being here, and I think we made a difference tonight, and I hopefully what we talked about, you can go talk to neighbors, friends, relatives, and spread the word, and the next time we're here, we'll have even more people and get it out to more kids even. There'll be people up in the lobby available to talk to and answer questions if you have any. Again, thanks for being here.